Okay, we're looking today at the subject of I Am the Way, part 2 of a 2-part series. I would like to talk a little bit today about the movement of the Christian movement that arose after Jesus, and just kind of the process that's involved in that, and ask some questions that we all might contemplate this week. So when I was in ministerial school, I was introduced to the 4 M's of the development of religious movements. And I once was able to find the source for this online, but I could not find it. Turns out there are several versions of the 4 M's. There's 5 M's sometimes, but so I just had to rely on my memory. But the 4 M's that I learned are the man, the message, the movement, and the monument. And so we start with the man and his message, and that's we put this in the context of Jesus. You have Jesus walking the countryside, teaching and healing, doing his ministry, and he's carrying a message, and that message concerns the kingdom of God. And the way that's interpreted today, thanks to the movement and the monument, is the kingdom of God is something that's going to be coming one of these days. But if we look very closely at what he said in certain places, or what he's said to have said, certain places, he talks about a kingdom in a very different way. It's the kingdom within. It's a spiritual dimension that is not coming in 4 months or at a harvest time, but is here now. And all we have to do is lift up our eyes and see it. So during the movement phase, the man is gone. In this case, he was crucified. And the message is carried on, but by word of mouth. Orally. It's called the oral tradition. And that goes on for a time, and then we have a monument. We have things beginning to be set in concrete. Ideas, beliefs. And so there's quite a span from the original person that's giving the message and the monument that it becomes. And that's what we want to look at. We want to look at that in the way we handle that, in the way we're handling that and understanding that. And we can do that by asking ourselves a couple of questions. But all world religions have reached the monument stage. And you'll notice there are different kinds of Buddhism. There are different kinds of Islam. There are Islamic beliefs. There are different kinds of Christianity. All have reached the monument stage, and that's when divisions occur. The movement phase is fairly coherent, or fairly agreed upon, although scholars will say there was nothing agreed upon by the early church, the early Christian movement, or the early Jesus movement, as it was called. But the man Jesus and his message are obscured beneath the veil of antiquity. Scholars today often refer to the loosely organized group of followers that formed after his crucifixion as the Jesus movement. During this movement stage, the articles of faith began to take shape. The teachings of Jesus became teachings about Jesus. So you can see how this would work. How many of you knew Mabel Donaldson, the founder of this church? How many of you know someone that knew her? Just a couple of us. So if we were to write the history of Mabel Donaldson, actually there are some resources available for us to draw upon, but she's been gone a long time. And so we would have to depend on what someone may have heard about her, or depend on maybe memory of hearsay, secondhand information that would be passed down. We have a picture of her. We don't have a picture of Jesus. We have lots of pictures of him, but not of the actual man. So even with today's technology and the fact that there's a lot in writing, and we could go back into the church archives and find information that would help tell the story, but we don't know how she thought. We don't know her as a person. There's a whole lot missing. And yet we have more resources available to us if we were to do that exercise than the writers of the Gospels. They would not have had probably very little written material. And what was written probably was written after the fact, during the movement period. So we have not necessarily the teachings of Jesus, although I think they're scattered throughout the Gospels, and that there's a way to find them. And that's what I want to pick up on starting next week. But it becomes teachings about Jesus. And the whole Christian theme is all about Jesus. That's one thing about driving back to the Midwest. It's heavy with traditional Christianity. I grew up in that. And it's we always pass that billboard on the way home that says, if you were to die today, how would you spend your eternity? And the answers I grew up with are there are only two possibilities. You'll either go to heaven or you go to hell. And it just kind of depends on what choices you make while you're going through your life. So that's very strong there. And I have a real deep connection with the Midwest, with that area. It always stirs when I go back. But it's not a religious connection. It's a spiritual connection. And there's something about that, I guess, going back to my physical roots. And I didn't grow up in the town where my mother lives. I grew up in northwestern Missouri. She's in southwestern Missouri. But it's same size town. The town that I grew up in is Gower, Missouri. And when we moved there, it was 500 people. We moved from St. Joseph, Missouri, which was about 70,000. And my fourth grade teacher thought I was a city slicker because I was from the huge city of St. Joseph. But it's all relative. But I have a connection to that area, to the humidity, to all the stuff that's there. I don't like it necessarily, but it stirs something. That's where I had my life-changing spiritual awakening. You know, you don't have to be in any given place because God is everywhere present, spread out upon the earth, and people don't necessarily see it. And once in a while, we get a glimpse of it. It is a reality to us, but there's something about that. But that is, I don't know why I was talking about that exactly, but it's the connection with the infinite. That's what we want. We want that connection with the infinite, not necessarily with the monument, but we're part of that. We probably all of us have joined or become affiliated in some way with one of the religious monuments of today. So that raises the question, if I were to ask the question, if I read something in the Gospels and asked myself, is this something Jesus would say? What am I really saying? And this is a question we all should explore in ourselves. Who is this Jesus that I'm talking about, and where did I get him? And what I could say is the Jesus I would be talking about in that case is the one I got from my religious upbringing. And I never questioned whether or not it was legitimate, whether or not that was the real Jesus. But here I would make these decisions in my thinking. Is this something Jesus would say? And I would say yes or no, depending on how I was thinking of Jesus. But is that Jesus? Or is that simply what I was taught, what I learned about Jesus? When you explore the Gospels, we say things like Jesus taught to love your neighbor as yourself, and he did apparently say that. But what about the time he turned over the tables in the temple? And he didn't just turn over the tables in the temple. He made a whip of leather cords that he whipped everybody with. So that doesn't look like a very loving thing to do. Or what about when he addressed the scribes and the Pharisees and called them things like scorpions and vipers and whitewashed tombs full of dead men's bones? Does that sound like a loving thing to say? So there's that Jesus. And we can say, well, he was justified. He had every right to be angry because everything was so messed up. What if it wasn't him that was angry? What if it was the gospel writer saying the whole temple, the whole church thing is messed up? It's under the wrong leadership, and it probably was. It became very corrupt. And Jesus probably did rebel against that. And so he had a side of him that got angry and took action toward some people. We just have to assume that. But what I'm saying is, most people will say he taught the golden rule: love your neighbor as do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Well, did he do that to the ones he was whipping in the temple? So you can come up with arguments against the image that you hold. And so we're kind of faced with that problem. Why are there two Jesuses? Why are there different ways of looking at him presented in the Scripture? But anyway, is this something Jesus would say? Who is that? Who's that Jesus? Where did I get him? This is something we should all ask, and this is what my journey has been over the last several years. I'm trying to drill down through all of the religious layers and do my best to find the mystic, find the spiritual teacher, which is what I think he was. In the case of Jesus, the man's message bore witness to the truth, focusing on the spiritual awakening of his individual followers. When you pray, go into your room, close the door, and pray to your Father who is unseen. In other words, Jesus taught the art of establishing a conscious relation with the infinite, with the absolute. A quote from Evelyn Underhill. And I think that's what he did. That was the man in the message. It was the man in the message was directed to the people. It was not part of the movement because the movement really did not exist. In other words, a movement, meaning we have a president, vice president, secretary, treasurer, all that kind of thing. We have an organization that is in place, and it has financial needs that we have to take care of and all kinds of things that begin to develop during the movement stage. And at the monument stage, all those things are in place. And it's much easier to focus on the monument than it is the man in the message. To ask who was the man and what was his message. We know what the monument teaches about him. That's what we've been indoctrinated with. And so when we are answering the question, is this something Jesus would say? It's a good exercise to say, who am I talking about? Where did I get this guy? Where did I get this image of Jesus? And how do I know what he would think, do, or say? And the truth is, we don't. We basically know what the authors of the four Gospels would think, do, or say. And we know how they would make Jesus think, do, or say. But we don't know how Jesus himself would think, do, or say. So the movement phase represents a shift in focus from the individual's awakening to the movement itself. followers exchange spiritual autonomy for a list of articles of faith, the profession of which keeps them in good standing with the fold. To become a leader within the movement does not require that one establish a conscious relation with the Absolute. It only requires an acceptance of the articles of faith and a commitment to the advancement of the movement. This is one of the things I began to see in the Unity movement. When I joined it because I had read a book that changed my life, and I've told you that story a million times. The book Lessons in Truth. And so I naturally assumed that to everyone that attended a Unity church, and the first Unity church I attended was 1,000 people in the congregation. The first two I attended, they're both very large. And I thought, this is incredible that this many people believe the way I do. And yet the more I would get to know people, the more I would realize they were treating this just like any other thing to do on Sunday morning in any other church. Many had not had a spiritual experience of any kind. When I got into ministerial training, I assumed that all of my ministerial colleagues would have had some type of mystical awakening that brought them into this field. But I would find very slowly that very few of them had had any type of an experience. I was watching a show about life in a monastery once, and the same thing as these monks were interviewed. None of them had had a spiritual experience. It was very clear. None of them had had a genuine spiritual experience. They joined a group, and they committed themselves to upholding the tenets of that group. But Jesus was a spiritual teacher. I think he expected his followers to awaken to the truth he was talking about. The most important commandment is to love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, and soul. And he told people how to get that awareness of their unity with God. And it's a very difficult thing to do, and not many of them would do it. And that's true today. And I don't hold any sense of judgment about that. It's just that I was surprised to find. When I first started going to a Unity church in Kansas City, the headquarters, I would drive 60 miles one way 2 and 3 times a week to get to it because it was such an exciting thing to me. And I would find that on snowy, icy days where I would white-knuckle my way to the church, that very few people would be there, people that lived just a few blocks away. And I thought, I'm not going to miss a Sunday. I'm not going to miss a day coming to church because it's a highlight of my life. And it was so exciting to me to have discovered this way of thought, first in a book and then to attend a place where actual people were going and of the same mindset. But and I'm not, again, passing judgment on that. I'm just saying that nothing could keep me from going. It would take a pretty bad ice storm. And we had some pretty bad ones in Missouri. But I don't think I missed too many Sundays. I would sometimes be there when the minister wasn't because of weather. And that was always disappointing because I really liked the minister that was there. Sig Paulson was his name. But anyway, the movement begins to gradually move away from the man, from the message. The message is there, but it becomes enshrined in dogma. And it's not, are you doing what the man suggested? It's, do you believe what the man said? Do you accept that as truth? So we're going from the practice that the man taught to the question of, do I believe what the man taught? What our founders were involved in was a process of awakening. And that's what I think the whole early unity movement stirred in people, is how to awaken, how to have a spiritual experience. That's the message. But what happens so often is we get into a profession like ministry and we pass on, what the founders taught. And we keep that alive. And I think that's good. It's good that we do that. But we want to not just pass on what the founders taught, we want to find our own connection with the infinite. We want to have our own experience. Because what made a Charles Fillmore, it wasn't because he went to church every Sunday. It was because he started meditating. He started thinking on his own. He started having his own experience with God. What made Jesus a Jesus? The Jesus, as I understand today, was one who spent time alone praying to the Father who's in secret. That's why he called his source the Father, because he knew it quite well. It was a first-hand experience for him. He was speaking from having been there. It's like if I was describing some scenes in Missouri, if you had been there, you would understand what I was talking about. If I described them, you had never been there, you would compare it to other things, other places you had been in your thinking. When somebody has been there, like Jesus said, my sheep hear my voice. Those who understand the spiritual experience understand what I'm saying. And that's an important clue. More and more people are abandoning formal religion in favor of the autonomy of their own spiritual path. While Jesus never abandoned his Judaism, he did place its rote teachings and dogmatic practices second to his conscious relationship to the Absolute, the Father. Jesus said, my kingdom is not of this world. If it were, my servants would fight to prevent my arrest by the Jewish leaders. But now my kingdom is from another place. And he's not speaking of a place, I don't believe, up in the sky. He's speaking of a place in consciousness where I'm aware of my oneness with God. And then in the Gospel of Thomas, he says, be passers-by. Shortest verse in the whole group of sayings. Be passers-by. In other words, don't get attached to this world. We're not of this world. There's something more to us. But the monument teaches all about this world. The Messiah will appear in this world. Make the appearance in this world, and this world will change. But he said, my kingdom is not of this world. It's of another dimension, and it's not something far off. It's within everyone. By all appearances, the way that he taught was intended to place his audience in harmony with the natural laws of manifestation. He taught through the simple yet brilliant use of parable, but most importantly, he taught by example. The truth that he bore witness to in word and deed is the very truth that will set us free. And I want to start going over next week some of the ideas that I think can be traced back. If we don't have to say to Jesus himself, but trace back to the mystical tradition, which is the understanding that God is everywhere present, centered in every individual, and each one of us is an expression of that. And when we begin to tap into that awareness, we begin to see the world in a very different place, in a very different way, I should say, and see ourselves in a very different way. That we are passing through this life. It's not permanent, but that which we are is. And I think that was a very encouraging message to people in Jesus' day. He said, don't worry about what you're going to wear. Many people were living in poverty, and they were worried every day about what they were going to eat or what they were going to wear. He said there's a way to tap into your spiritual source where you will open up to the supply, to the prospering side of this presence. And that's been one of the staple teachings of unity. Okay, so we'll start that next week. We'll continue this from that perspective. But we'll look at certain sayings that are attributed to him that have a very rich meaning if we understand it correctly, or understand it in a way that is spiritually based. Okay. Thank you for coming out. Thank you for watching this week's program. If you enjoyed this video, please share it with others. We want to reach as many people as we can, and we appreciate your help. If you'd like to help support this ministry, just click the donate card at the top right-hand corner of your screen. Your financial support means a lot to us. We have many subjects in our video lineup, so feel free to take a look. If there's a topic you don't see and would like me to address, just put it in the comment section. I'd love to know what's on your mind. To subscribe to this channel, simply click our logo. Thanks again for your interest in independent unity, and have a wonderful week.